Dying empires may go to war for various reasons, often stemming from a combination of internal and external factors. In this video, I'm going to address 5 factors that can be applied to the US empire, which serious geopolitical experts agree is in a state of decline. Leaders of a dying empire may engage in war to distract their own population from domestic issues and discontent. By focusing on public's attention on external enemy, they can unify the country and consolidate power. As empires decline, rising powers may challenge their dominance. To protect their interests and preserve their influence, dying empires might engage in conflicts to prevent the ascent of rival powers. A militaristic culture and a powerful military-industrial complex can eternalize the idea that war is a solution to problems, even when it might not be in the empire's best interest. Dying empires may fear losing control over strategic regions or key resources. To maintain their influence and prevent competitors from gaining power, they might resort to military actions. In some cases, leaders of declining empires may be blinded by arrogance and refuse to acknowledge the signs of decline. They may believe they can reverse their fate through military conquest, even if it is not a viable solution. Don't you think these factors already exist in the case of the US empire? I would argue that the US escalation in Ukraine and Taiwan against Russia and China lies in the context of America's hysterical approach towards its main rivals to either stop them from completing the process of establishing the foundations of a multipolar world order, or, in the case of a downfall, to leave behind as much destruction as possible and huge economic crisis for the succeeding powers to carry and try to solve instead of focusing on peace building and economic development. Now, some may think the recent visit of former US National Security Advisor and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to Beijing and his meetings with Xi Jinping, Wang Yi, and Defense Minister Li Shangfu, the person America's defense minister was not allowed to see, was just a coincidence. But experts on China have something else to say. The 100-year-old man went on a plane for 14 hours to Beijing. Kissinger jeopardized his health to travel to China, but for what reason? One China expert argues that Beijing has spent the past decade insulating itself from the inevitable US bonds crash, sending the signal that Beijing will not be enthusiastic about saving the US as in 2008. Since the US economy may collapse, is war the only exit for the US empire? Kenny Wong believes Kissinger traveled to Beijing to discuss the possibility of war and how to minimize damage when, not if, war breaks out between China and the US. So will the US succeed in provoking China into war, or will the latter continue playing the role of the responsible adult?
I think fundamentally these nut jobs, I think they can get away with it because they actually don't think it will lead to a nuclear war. Because their own belief in American exceptionalism, they don't think China would respond. Because so far, China has been incredibly patient. I mean, the Chinese leadership must have like the discipline of of Zen masters. If it's up to me, the war would have been started a long time ago. But I think China has been the responsible adult right now by holding back, because the whole U.S. strategy currently is to continue provocation, to force China to fire the first shot. I was watching a war game which conducted by one of these think tanks last year. Their whole premise is, again, a replay of Pacific War, except now with China bombing the U.S. base on Guam to start the war. But what if China don't pull the trigger? This is what China is not right now. China is trying to break through the American economic blockade through its own indigenous innovations, which I actually believe have a high degree of success. And China is not going to go to war just because U.S. has this economic blockade. But the U.S. arrogance can be seen by the recent Janet Yellen visit to China. So basically, Janet Yellen went to China supposedly to stabilize the ties. But what Janet Yellen told the Chinese is that You guys are not supposed to place restrictions on those the rare earth element gallium and germanium that's used to make advanced semiconductors. That's the violation of free market spirit. But we have a right to restrict the chips export to you because we have valid national security concerns. So basically, you guys don't get to do what we do because we make the rules. And I think that level of arrogance leading all these nut jobs going down this very dangerous path. China has been incredibly patient, incredibly rational. Some other country may not access some other country may not act the same way as China does. Like we see when U.S. has pressed on Russia on its expanding NATO, encroaching on Russia's boundaries, and that sparks the Ukraine war. But China is trying to avoid a war on Taiwan Strait. So that's the rational Chinese government is actually our best hope right now for averting World War III.
I think even though Henry Kissinger is a war criminal, and I'm not very much of a fan of him, but it seems like he might be a voice of reason, and he might actually negotiate something with China. What the US has been doing is putting pressure somehow, maybe for negotiation on a bailout, because what people tend to forget is that one of the main problems that the US has, and this is related to the fact that they had the privilege of printing whatever amount of currency they had, because it's the US dollar is a global currency. But what the problem the US has is a debt of over $31 trillion. And I think there's a possibility that maybe the US might be actually negotiating some kind of bailout, because that could be a solution out of war. Because if the US were to lose the US dollar hegemony, it would be just dramatic. But not only for the US. Keep in mind that nobody has any interest in having the US collapse. The whole world would suffer out of this. And also China. Its economy is closely related to the US, although China has been actually, they risk what they call decoupling, and they're risking for a while. There's a diversification towards South America with the global South, with Africa. But China is very pragmatic. They don't want war, and actually they still want to trade with the US. It's not of China's interest to have the US collapse. He wants a multipolar world. There's a new world order that's going to be built up, and I think we might be in a situation where negotiations are being done. I like to compare. There was a meeting of BRICS a few months ago, and I like to compare it to the Yalta meeting. It was when the Yalta meeting was when the war was not over yet, but they were actually starting to prepare the world of tomorrow. What would be the new world order? And BRICS is part of it. So somehow now, maybe what Kissinger might be doing is trying to set up some conditions how we could do this transition. But again, this is a speculation. We don't know what happened at that meeting. But the main problem the US has right now is this huge debt that it cannot repay. And if the US loses its US dollar hegemony, that could be dramatic. It would be just disastrous because it would be like a hyperinflation, huge unemployment. So that is by speculation, but it's hard to say. That's maybe my wish too, because we don't want to have a war, which would be ultimately a mutual destruction, because nobody wins on the Third World War when you have a nuclear superpower like China, Russia, and the US facing each other.